energy for the things that truly matter. That moment of clarity, the one where you ask yourself, is this all there is where your journey to financial mastery begins. Money Mastery is not just a book about finances, it's a story about transformation. It's a guide for anyone who's ever felt stuck, caught in the endless loop of earning, spending, and barely getting by. It's for those who believe there's more to life than clocking in and clocking out while quietly letting their dreams fade away. This book doesn't promise overnight wealth or magic formulas. Instead, it offers something far more powerful, a path to reclaiming control. Through the relatable story of Marcus, an ordinary person who learns to rethink his approach to money, you'll discover how to build sustainable wealth without losing sight of what matters most. Marcus's journey mirrors the challenges many of us face, struggling to break free from paycheck to paycheck living, questioning long-held beliefs about money, and learning to align finances with values, passions, and purpose. Drawing inspiration from timeless principles in books like The Richest Man in Babylon and modern insights from financial and behavioral experts, Money Mastery combines actionable strategies with the kind of real-world wisdom that creates lasting change. You'll learn how to plant the seeds of abundance, break free from limiting money myths, and create multiple income streams that allow you to live life on your terms. But more importantly, you'll explore the balance sheet of life, understanding that true wealth isn't just measured in dollars but in freedom, relationships, health, and fulfillment. This book is for those who are ready to rise above the noise, reject superficial measures of success, and build a life of quiet confidence and intention. It's about turning financial mastery into a foundation for personal growth, freedom, and joy. The journey begins with a single step, a shift in mindset, a decision to take control, and a commitment to living with purpose. Are you ready to take that step? Your future is waiting. Chapter 1. The Catalyst for Change. The rain lashed against the windows of the cramped apartment, a staccato rhythm that mirrored the chaos in Marcus's mind. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table, glowing faintly as a reminder of all the bills he had yet to pay. The weight of it all felt unbearable. He wasn't lazy. Marcus had 2 jobs, neither of which he enjoyed, but they kept the lights on. Still, at 35, he couldn't shake the feeling that life was passing him by while he stayed stuck in survival mode. He stared at the spreadsheet on his screen, columns of numbers that refused to add up to anything hopeful. Rent, utilities, groceries, everything had risen, but his income hadn't. What was left at the end of each month was barely enough to breathe, let alone dream. As he closed his eyes, memories of his father's voice echoed, laced with disappointment. "Hard work is all you need to succeed, son," he used to say. But Marcus had worked harder than anyone he knew, and success remained out of reach. It wasn't just the money. That night, as the rain poured, Marcus realized what he truly lacked: control. His time, his choices, his peace of mind, all of it seemed owned by something or someone else. He thought of how often he said no to things he loved. No to friends inviting him out for dinner. No to trips he couldn't afford. No to afternoons spent playing guitar, a passion that once made him feel alive. It wasn't fair, but Marcus wasn't sure who to blame, himself, the system, or both. As he sat there, a book he had ordered weeks ago caught his eye, sitting on the edge of the table. It was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. A friend had recommended it, saying it might help him see things differently. Marcus scoffed at first. Books like that always felt like empty promises wrapped in motivational jargon. But tonight, with nothing left to lose, he opened it. The words were unlike anything he expected. Hill spoke of mindset as the foundation of wealth, a concept that resonated deeply. It wasn't just about earning more, it was about thinking differently. The stories of ordinary men who had achieved extraordinary success lit something in Marcus, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. He read about Henry Ford, a man with no formal education who reshaped the automotive industry because he dared to believe he could. Marcus paused, gripping the edge of the book. When had he stopped believing in himself? Somewhere along the way, he had let his circumstances define his potential, accepting a narrative of limitation rather than possibility. Hill's idea of a definite major purpose hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. He didn't have one. He was drifting, reacting to life rather than shaping it. That realization hurt, but it also ignited something. What if he could reclaim control, not just over his finances, but over his life? What if wealth wasn't about working endlessly for scraps, but about creating a system where money worked for him? Over the next week, Marcus devoured the book, scribbling notes in the margins. He began to see his struggle differently. It wasn't a dead end, it was the beginning of something bigger. His lack of financial security wasn't just a problem, it was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to rebuild. Inspired by Hill, Marcus set a bold goal: to achieve financial independence within 5 years. He didn't know how yet, but he promised himself one thing: he would figure it out. No more excuses, no more waiting for a miracle. This was his catalyst, his moment to take charge. As he closed the book that night, Marcus felt the rain easing outside. He didn't have the answers, but he had something better, a spark. And sparks, he knew, could start fires. Chapter 2. The Seeds of Abundance. Marcus had heard the phrase wealth begins in the mind before, but it had always sounded like one of those platitudes motivational speakers spouted at overpriced seminars. Yet, as he stood in line at the bank the following week, that phrase kept circling in his head. He had started looking at his life differently, not just as a series of obligations, but as a canvas for possibilities. It wasn't easy, years of struggle had made doubt a constant companion, but something had shifted. As he waited, he scrolled through his phone and stumbled across a TED Talk by Carol Dweck, author of Mindset: The New Psychology of Success. Her voice was calm yet firm as she spoke of 2 types of mindsets, fixed and growth. In a fixed mindset, people believed their abilities were limited, dictated by their circumstances or innate talents. In a growth mindset, failure wasn't an end but a stepping stone to something greater. Marcus listened, riveted. The question was simple: which mindset had he been living with? The answer was obvious. His life had been dominated by a fixed mindset. Every time he thought, "I can't afford that or I'll never get ahead," he had closed a door that might have led to something extraordinary. It wasn't that he didn't work hard. Marcus prided himself on his work ethic, but he had always believed the limits of his situation were set in stone. Now, for the first time, he wondered what if they weren't. Later that day, Marcus took a walk through his neighborhood to clear his mind. The streets were quiet, lined with modest houses and the occasional for sale sign. He couldn't help but notice one house in particular, a small fixer-upper with a weathered for sale by owner sign planted in the front yard. The sight of it stirred something in him. His friend Jasmine had recently mentioned real estate as a way to build wealth, and though he'd brushed it off at the time, the idea now seemed less far-fetched. Maybe this is what Dweck meant, he thought. Looking at things not as they are, but as they could be. That night, Marcus decided to start planting the seeds of abundance in his life. He began with a simple exercise he'd read about, writing down every limiting belief he held about money. He listed them honestly, without judgment. "I'll never be rich. Wealth is for lucky people. I don't have what it takes." Each one stared back at him, bold and unforgiving. But instead of letting those words define him, he rewrote them. "I'll never be rich" became "I am learning to build wealth." "Wealth is for lucky people" became "Wealth is for those who prepare and persist." "I don't have what it takes" became "I have everything I need to get started." He didn't fully believe the new statements, at least not yet, but he wrote them anyway, knowing the act itself was a kind of rebellion against the constraints he had always accepted. The next morning, Marcus woke early, his mind buzzing with ideas. He researched budgeting methods and discovered the 50-30-20 rule: 50% of income for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings or investments. It seemed simple enough to try. He set up a spreadsheet, tracking every penny he spent. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of control over his finances, even if it was just a small start. He also began consuming stories of ordinary people who had created extraordinary lives. He read about Chris Gardner, whose memoir The Pursuit of Happiness chronicled his rise from homelessness to becoming a successful stockbroker. He learned about J.K. Rowling, who wrote her first Harry Potter novel while on welfare. These weren't just stories to Marcus, they were proof that transformation was possible. In the weeks that followed, the small seeds he planted began to grow. He started saying yes to opportunities he would have ignored before, like attending a free financial literacy workshop at the library. He connected with Jasmine, who shared insights about her own journey into real estate. Each step, though small, felt significant. Marcus still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt the stirrings of abundance, not just in his wallet, but in his heart. The wealth he sought wasn't just about money, it was about possibility, and possibility, he realized, was everywhere. Chapter 3. Breaking Free from the Money Myths. The weekend brought a family barbecue, one of those gatherings where everyone spoke too loudly and memories from decades past were retold as if they'd happened yesterday. Marcus, armed with his newfound determination to turn his financial life around, found himself standing near the grill, listening to his Uncle Mike's familiar rant. "It's all rigged," Mike declared, flipping burgers with an air of authority. "The rich get richer, and the rest of us? We're just pawns in their game. You can work your fingers to the bone and still end up with nothing." Marcus nodded out of politeness, but felt a pang of resistance. He had believed that narrative for so long, that wealth was an exclusive club he would never be part of. But now, for the first time, he wasn't so sure. Could it be that the biggest barrier between him and financial freedom wasn't the system but the stories he'd been told about it? Later that evening, Marcus revisited the myths he'd grown up believing. The one Uncle Mike had repeated, "The rich get richer," was one of them. Another was "Money can't buy happiness." He thought about his childhood, watching his parents argue over bills, how money seemed to dictate the mood of the household. It wasn't that they were bad parents, they'd simply been stuck in survival mode, much like he was now. But the idea that wealth and happiness were incompatible? That didn't seem true anymore. He had read studies showing that financial security did, in fact, correlate with greater happiness, up to a point. Beyond that, it wasn't about having more, it was about having enough. He thought about Jasmine's advice from their recent conversation. She had shared how her own journey began with rejecting the myth that you have to work harder to earn more. As a real estate agent, she worked smarter, not harder, by automating processes and outsourcing tasks that didn't require her direct involvement. "Time," she had said, "is the most valuable currency we have." Determined to confront these myths head-on, Marcus spent hours reading and reflecting. One book that deeply resonated was The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. In it, Housel explained that financial success wasn't about intelligence or even effort, it was about behavior. The wealthy weren't all geniuses, they were people who understood the long game, avoided unnecessary risks, and let time and compounding work in their favor. That was a game Marcus could learn to play. He decided to test one of the biggest myths. You have to have money to make money. This belief had always felt like a brick wall, an unscalable obstacle that kept him from even trying. But now, armed with a small emergency fund, and a little extra from cutting back on unnecessary expenses, he set a goal: invest $50 in something that could grow. With Jasmine's guidance, he decided on a low-cost index fund. The concept was simple enough: spread his money across a basket of stocks that represented the market. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. "Start small," Jasmine had said. "What matters isn't the amount, it's building the habit." The act of investing, however modest, was transformative. For the first time, Marcus wasn't just reacting to his circumstances, he was taking action to shape them. He began to see money not as a finite resource, but as a tool, a seed that, when nurtured, could grow into something greater. Over time, Marcus became more attuned to the ways these myths had shaped not just his beliefs, but his actions, or lack thereof. How many opportunities had he ignored because he assumed they were out of reach? How often had he avoided asking questions, fearing he'd look foolish? One evening, as he reviewed his finances, he noticed a small but significant change. His mindset was shifting. He wasn't rich, not yet, but he was no longer poor in hope or possibility. The myths that had once bound him were unraveling, replaced by a new truth: wealth wasn't a closed door, it was a path, open to anyone willing to take the first step. And Marcus? He was already walking it. Chapter 4. The Wealth Compass. Finding Your True North. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as Marcus sat in the corner of a bustling cafe, a notebook open in front of him. This wasn't just another aimless session of jotting down thoughts. Today he was on a mission to find clarity. For years, his life had been dictated by a series of tasks: work, pay bills, repeat. But now something deeper was stirring. He realized wealth wasn't just about money, it was about purpose. And if he was going to build the life he wanted, he needed to find his true north. As he flipped through pages of his notes, he remembered something Jasmine had said during their last conversation. Wealth without purpose is like a ship without a compass. You might be moving, but you're not going anywhere meaningful. Her words lingered, nudging Marcus to ask himself the question he had long avoided. What do I really want? The answer wasn't obvious, but he knew where to start. Pulling out his phone, he searched for Simon Sinek's famous TED Talk, Start with Why. He had heard about it countless times but had never taken the time to watch. As Sinek's voice filled his earbuds, Marcus was struck by the simplicity of the message. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The principle wasn't just for businesses, it applied to life. Purpose wasn't a luxury for the wealthy, it was the foundation for achieving anything meaningful. Marcus thought back to his younger self, the version of him who dreamed without limits. He had wanted to create, to make music, to leave a legacy. Over time, those dreams had been buried under responsibilities and doubts. But now, sitting in the cafe, with Sinek's words resonating in his mind, he felt a spark of that old ambition reignite. He picked up his pen and began to write. Instead of focusing on what he didn't have, he imagined the life he wanted. Freedom to spend time with family, the ability to travel without checking his bank account first. A career that fueled his passions rather than drained his energy. As he wrote, a vision began to take shape. His true north wasn't about accumulating wealth for its own sake, it was about building a life that felt rich in every sense of the word. Over the next few days, Marcus poured himself into understanding how purpose could align with his financial goals. He read stories of people who had turned their passions into sustainable businesses, like Blake Mycoskie, the founder of Tom's Shoes, whose mission to provide shoes to children in need had fueled a global brand. Purpose, Marcus realized, wasn't just an abstract concept, it was a powerful driver of success. One evening, while researching, Marcus stumbled upon a concept that deeply resonated: ikigai. The Japanese word loosely translates to reason for being and sits at the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. It felt like a revelation. If he could align these four elements, he could build a life that wasn't just financially secure but deeply fulfilling. Marcus began experimenting with small steps. He revived his passion for music by offering online lessons, something he had always thought about but never pursued. At first it felt awkward. His first student was a nervous teenager who barely spoke, but by the end of the session, Marcus felt a rush of energy he hadn't experienced in years. Teaching music didn't just bring in extra income, it reminded him of who he was. As the weeks passed, Marcus noticed a shift in how he approached his goals. Decisions that once felt overwhelming became easier when guided by purpose. He wasn't just saving money, he was building a future aligned with his values. He wasn't just working, he was creating opportunities to live the life he envisioned. One evening, as he sat on his apartment balcony watching the city lights flicker, Marcus smiled. For the first time, he felt like he was steering his own ship. The compass was clear, and the destination was one he had chosen. Purpose wasn't just his guide, it was his greatest source of wealth. Chapter 5. Building the Invisible Framework. The early morning air was crisp as Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers and an open laptop. It had been weeks since he had started asking himself the hard questions: what he wanted from life, how he wanted to feel, and who he wanted to become. The answers had given him clarity, but now he faced a daunting challenge: turning those dreams into a concrete plan. Dreams, after all, were useless without action. He remembered something he had read in Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. The authors spoke about the power of knowing exactly where every dollar went. For Marcus, the thought was intimidating. His finances had always felt like a tangled mess. Money came in, money went out, and he never really knew where it all disappeared. But if he was serious about building wealth, he knew he needed to confront the chaos. Pulling out his bank statements, Marcus created a spreadsheet. Every expense from the past 3 months was categorized: rent, groceries, dining out, subscriptions, and miscellaneous, which, he quickly realized, was a black hole for impulse purchases. The results were both illuminating and unsettling. He was spending more on coffee shop lattes and food delivery than he cared to admit. As he stared at the numbers, he felt the familiar pang of self-criticism rising. But this time, he stopped himself. This isn't about guilt, he reminded himself. It's about awareness. He remembered a line from Robin's book: money is something we choose to trade our life energy for. Every dollar he spent was a reflection of his priorities, and if his spending didn't align with his values, it wasn't the money that needed to change, it was the choices behind it. With newfound determination, Marcus began creating what he called his invisible framework, a financial plan designed not to constrain him but to support the life he wanted to build. He started with a simple rule: the 50-30-20 budgeting method. 50% of his income would go toward essentials like rent and bills, 30% toward discretionary spending, and 20% toward savings and investments. The simplicity of the structure made it feel manageable, like a map guiding him out of a maze. But building the framework wasn't just about budgeting, it was about habits. Inspired by James Clear's Atomic Habits, Marcus committed to small, consistent changes. He brewed coffee at home instead of stopping at the cafe each morning, redirecting the savings to his new Freedom Fund. He set up automatic transfers to a high-yield savings account, ensuring that saving became effortless, rather than optional. These weren't grand gestures, but they added up. One evening, as he updated his spreadsheet, Marcus noticed something remarkable. For the first time, he had money left over at the end of the month. It wasn't much, but it was proof that the framework was working. The sense of control was addictive. No longer was he drifting from paycheck to paycheck, he was laying bricks on the path to financial independence. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was mental. Marcus began seeing money not as a source of stress, but as a tool, a resource he could direct toward his goals. He revisited his vision and started allocating funds toward it. A portion of his savings went into a travel fund, a dream he had always put off. Another portion was earmarked for investing, something he had once found intimidating but now saw as essential for building long-term wealth. As the weeks turned into months, the framework became second nature. Marcus's spending was deliberate, his saving consistent, and his goals clear. He no longer felt like he was fighting against the current. Instead, he was building a life of his own design, one small choice at a time. Sitting on his balcony one evening, Marcus reflected on how far he had come. The invisible framework wasn't flashy, but it was powerful. It wasn't just about money, it was about freedom, possibility, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're in control. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Chapter 6. The Power of Multipliers. The city hummed with its usual rhythm as Marcus walked to his favorite library on a brisk Saturday morning. He had been coming here often lately, a place where distractions faded and his focus sharpened. Today, he wasn't just searching for answers, he was searching for possibilities. In his journey to reclaim his financial life, Marcus had begun to understand a truth that eluded so many: working harder wasn't the answer. If he wanted to build true wealth, he needed his money to work harder than he did. Settling into a quiet corner, he opened The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas J. Stanley. The book had been recommended by Jasmine, his ever-encouraging friend. As he turned the pages, one concept stood out: the wealthy prioritized building assets that generated income. Marcus let the words sink in. It wasn't about earning more just to spend more, it was about creating systems where money could grow independently of his effort. He thought of his parents, who had worked tirelessly all their lives but never seemed to get ahead. Their earnings had flowed like water through a sieve, every dollar already spoken for by the time it arrived. Marcus realized he had been following the same pattern, chasing income without ever considering how to multiply it. That had to change. Later that evening, he met Jasmine for coffee. She listened intently as he shared his thoughts, nodding as if she had been waiting for this realization. "You've got it," she said, leaning forward. "The key to wealth isn't in how much you make, it's in how you multiply what you already have. Think of it like planting seeds. You don't just plant one and expect a forest. You plant as many as you can and let them grow." Her analogy clicked, and Marcus decided to explore the ways he could plant his own financial seeds. The first step was understanding the concept of passive income. He had heard the term before, but had always dismissed it as something only the rich could achieve. Now he saw it differently. Passive income wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity for anyone looking to escape the hamster wheel of trading time for money. He started small, investing in a low-cost index fund he had researched weeks earlier. The idea was simple: instead of picking individual stocks, the fund allowed him to own a small piece of the entire market. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and that steadiness was what Marcus needed to build confidence. Each month, he added to his investment, watching his account grow bit by bit. It wasn't much yet, but it was more than he had ever thought possible. Inspired by his progress, Marcus began exploring other opportunities. He started teaching guitar lessons online, leveraging his passion for music in a way that required minimal effort once the lessons were recorded. He also considered Jasmine's world, real estate, and started researching how rental properties could become an additional income stream. While he wasn't ready to dive into that world just yet, the idea no longer felt out of reach. One evening, while listening to a podcast on financial independence, Marcus heard a phrase that stayed with him. Money is a tool, not a trophy. It reminded him of his growing portfolio and side projects. Each investment and income stream wasn't just about accumulating wealth, it was about creating freedom to choose, to explore, to live life on his terms. As the months passed, Marcus saw the fruits of his efforts. His investments were compounding, his online lessons were generating a steady trickle of income, and his mindset was shifting. He no longer viewed money as something he had to chase, he saw it as a partner in his journey. Each dollar he invested was a seed planted in the soil of his future. One night, sitting on his balcony under a sky scattered with stars, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. He was no longer the man frantically chasing a paycheck, constantly worried about making ends meet. He was becoming someone new, someone who understood the power of multipliers and how wealth wasn't just earned but grown. For the first time, Marcus felt something he hadn't in years: ease. He was no longer working for money. His money, at last, was working for him. Chapter 7. The Balance Sheet of Life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park as Marcus leaned back on a wooden bench, watching children chase each other on the playground. He had come here to think, to step away from the spreadsheets and goal-setting sessions that now defined his days. As much as he was proud of his financial progress, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His life felt like a ledger, inputs and outputs, profits and losses, but where was the joy? His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from an old friend, Sarah, inviting him to a gathering at her place that evening. Marcus hesitated. In the past he would have declined, citing his tight budget or exhaustion from work. But something Jasmine had said recently lingered in his mind. Wealth isn't just about money, it's about balance. Don't let your ambition rob you of the life you're trying to build. Later that evening, as he sat among friends, the sound of laughter filling the room, Marcus realized how much he had missed moments like this. For too long he had seen socializing as a luxury he couldn't afford, an indulgence that distracted from his financial goals. But tonight it felt like an investment, not in dollars, but in connection and well-being. The next morning, Marcus returned to his notebook, determined to redefine his approach to wealth. He drew a simple chart with two columns, one labeled financial wealth and the other life wealth. Under financial wealth, he listed the usual suspects: savings, investments, and income streams. But under life wealth, the categories were different: health, relationships, personal growth, and experiences. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been so focused on building the first column that he had neglected the second. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began exploring ways to balance both sides of his life ledger. He started with his health, something he had ignored for years. Inspired by Atomic Habits by James Clear, he committed to small, manageable changes. He swapped late-night snacks for fresh fruit and began taking evening walks around the neighborhood. At first, the changes felt insignificant, but over time he noticed an increase in energy and focus, a reminder that wealth meant little without the vitality to enjoy it. His relationships, too, became a priority. Marcus made a list of people who mattered to him, friends, family, mentors, and reached out to reconnect. He realized that many of these relationships had languished not out of neglect, but because he had always told himself he was too busy. Lunch with his sister turned into a heartfelt conversation about their childhood, and a coffee date with a former colleague sparked a collaborative project that reignited his creative energy. One weekend, Marcus attended a financial seminar where the speaker shared an unexpected insight: time is your most valuable currency. Spend it wisely. The words resonated deeply. He began to see that building wealth wasn't just about accumulating assets, it was about aligning his time with his values. That realization led him to make another shift, blocking out sacred time in his schedule for things that brought him joy, like playing guitar or reading novels. These moments weren't luxuries, they were necessities. Despite his efforts to find balance, Marcus faced challenges. One evening, while reviewing his finances, he felt the old guilt creeping in. Could he have saved more this month? Should he have skipped that dinner out with friends? But then he remembered the chart in his notebook. Financial wealth and life wealth weren't enemies, they were partners, each supporting the other. The dinner wasn't a loss, it was an investment in connection. His evening walks weren't distractions, they were deposits into his health account. Over time, Marcus began to see the benefits of his balanced approach. He was more productive at work, more present in his relationships, and more at peace with himself. His life no longer felt like a relentless grind. Instead, it was a mosaic of moments, some dedicated to financial growth, others to living fully in the present. One evening, as Marcus sat on his balcony, sipping tea and watching the city lights, he realized something profound. True wealth wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about harmony, between ambition and gratitude, work and rest, striving and being. His balance sheet wasn't perfect, but it was finally his. Chapter 8. The Quiet Art of Wealth. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and Marcus sat at his kitchen table, flipping through a yellowed copy of The Richest Man in Babylon. The book had been recommended by Jasmine, and its timeless lessons had struck a chord with him. The simplicity of its principles, save consistently, invest wisely, and live within your means, felt refreshing in a world obsessed with flashy wealth and overnight success stories. Marcus had begun to appreciate something he hadn't noticed before: true wealth was often quiet. He thought back to an encounter earlier that week with a coworker, Liam, who always seemed to be struggling to keep up appearances. Liam drove a luxury car, wore designer suits, and had a collection of watches that sparkled under the office lights. But in private moments, Liam often hinted at the stress of credit card debt and the pressure to maintain his lifestyle. It was a reminder to Marcus that wealth wasn't about looking rich, it was about living rich, on your own terms. As the rain continued to drum against the windows, Marcus found himself reflecting on a story from The Millionaire Next Door. The book described how many millionaires lived modestly, driving older cars and living in homes that didn't scream extravagance. Instead of flaunting their wealth, they focused on growing it quietly, investing in assets that appreciated over time. These were the principles Marcus had begun adopting in his own life, and while it hadn't been easy to resist the allure of instant gratification, he found immense satisfaction in the steady growth of his investments and savings. He had started calling this approach stealth wealth. It wasn't about hiding success out of shame, but about protecting it from unnecessary risks, judgment, and distractions. Marcus thought of the advice he had read in The Quiet Millionaire, which emphasized the importance of financial privacy. The author's words echoed in his mind. The less people know about your finances, the safer and freer you'll feel. This idea had transformed Marcus's relationship with money. He no longer felt the need to explain his financial decisions to anyone or seek validation for his choices. When friends teased him about skipping the latest gadget upgrade or holding onto his old car, he smiled, knowing that his quiet discipline was building something far more valuable than fleeting admiration. But stealth wealth wasn't just about privacy, it was also about intentionality. Marcus had learned to prioritize investments that aligned with his values. Inspired by Jasmine's real estate ventures, he had started exploring opportunities to invest in rental properties. His first deal was small, a modest one-bedroom apartment in a growing neighborhood, but it represented something profound. His money was now working for him. The rewards weren't just financial. Marcus began to notice subtle but powerful changes in his mindset. He no longer felt anxious about money or caught in the endless cycle of earning and spending. Each decision, whether to save, invest, or spend, was deliberate, driven by his long-term goals rather than impulse or societal pressure. His confidence grew as he realized that true wealth wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. One evening, over dinner with Jasmine, Marcus shared his thoughts on this newfound perspective. "It's funny," he said, swirling his glass of water, "the more I focus on building wealth quietly, the more freedom I feel. I don't need to prove anything to anyone." Jasmine smiled. "Exactly. Real wealth isn't about impressing others, it's about living life on your terms. And the best part? When you're not distracted by trying to look successful, you can focus on actually becoming successful." As the months passed, Marcus's quiet wealth-building approach became second nature. He automated his investments, continued saving diligently, and resisted the temptation to compare his journey to anyone else's. The results were undeniable. His finances were thriving, but more importantly, so was he. His life was no longer defined by external validation, but by a deep sense of purpose and control. On a quiet evening, as Marcus sat by his window watching the city lights, he felt a profound sense of peace. He wasn't chasing wealth to show it off or to fill a void. He was building it as a foundation for a life he loved, a life rich in freedom, fulfillment, and meaning. Wealth, Marcus realized, didn't need to shout. Its power lay in its quiet strength, its ability to provide security, choices, and opportunities without the need for constant display. And in that quiet he had found something priceless, a life truly his own. Chapter 9. Rising Above the Noise. The sun was setting as Marcus stepped into the dimly lit conference room. Tonight's event was a networking mixer for professionals in the finance and business world, and Jasmine had insisted he attend. "You need to expand your circle," she'd said. "Opportunities come from people, not just plans." Marcus wasn't entirely convinced. The idea of pitching himself to strangers and making small talk felt more intimidating than inspiring. Still, he had come, armed with a business casual outfit and a faint hope that the evening might offer something meaningful. As he scanned the room, he overheard snippets of conversation. People talked loudly about deals, startups, and ventures, each voice trying to outshine the next. The room buzzed with energy, but beneath the surface, it felt hollow, like everyone was competing to be heard over the noise. Marcus grabbed a drink and retreated to a corner, observing rather than participating. It wasn't long before a man approached him, a tall, confident figure in a tailored suit who introduced himself as Colin. Within minutes, Colin launched into a monologue about his six-figure portfolio, his startup plans, and the exclusive circles he frequented. Marcus nodded politely but felt a familiar pang of discomfort. Was this what success looked like? Loud, self-assured, and constantly advertising itself? Later that evening, Jasmine found him standing alone near the exit. "How's it going?" she asked, handing him a fresh drink. Marcus shrugged. "It's like everyone here is trying to prove something," he said. Jasmine smiled knowingly. "That's the noise," she said. "You don't have to be louder. You just have to be smarter." The words stayed with him as he left the event. Rising above the noise wasn't about competing for attention, it was about staying true to his values and building quietly, even when surrounded by distraction. He realized the noise wasn't just external, it was internal too. Doubts, insecurities, and the nagging fear of being left behind had often pushed him toward decisions that weren't aligned with his goals. Over the next few days, Marcus reflected on how to stay grounded amidst the chaos. He remembered something he'd read in The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Focus on what you can control, and let go of what you can't. It was easier said than done, but Marcus knew it was the only way to maintain clarity. He began identifying his sources of noise. Social media, for one, was a constant temptation to compare his journey to others. The curated highlight reels made him feel as though he was always falling short. To combat this, Marcus started limiting his screen time, replacing it with moments of quiet reflection. Each morning he wrote down 3 things he was grateful for and 3 priorities for the day. It wasn't much, but it helped him tune out the chatter and focus on what mattered. Another key source of noise was the opinions of others. Whether it was co-workers questioning his financial choices or friends subtly pressuring him to spend, Marcus had often let their voices influence his decisions. But now, armed with his growing confidence, he learned to say no with grace. When someone questioned why he hadn't upgraded his car, he simply smiled and said, "It's not a priority for me right now." The more he owned his choices, the less the noise affected him. One evening, Marcus attended another networking event, this time with a different mindset. He didn't try to impress anyone or compare himself to others. Instead, he listened, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his story honestly when prompted. To his surprise, people responded warmly. One attendee even mentioned a potential collaboration that could help Marcus expand his guitar teaching side hustle. By staying authentic, he had created an opportunity without needing to shout over the crowd. As Marcus's confidence grew, so did his ability to focus. The noise, both internal and external, didn't disappear entirely, but it no longer dictated his path. He began to see distractions as tests of his resolve, challenges that strengthened his commitment to his goals. On a quiet Sunday evening, Marcus sat on his balcony, the city's hum faint in the distance. He thought about the past year, how far he had come and how much he had learned. The noise, he realized, wasn't inherently bad. It was part of life, a constant presence that he could choose to engage with or rise above. By focusing on what truly mattered, he had found a sense of clarity and purpose that no amount of noise could drown out. For the first time, Marcus felt certain of one thing: true success wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the most grounded, the most authentic, and the most aligned with your values. Rising above the noise wasn't just a strategy, it was a way of life. Chapter 10. Mastery in Motion. The morning sunlight streamed through the window as Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee, savoring the stillness of the moment. It had been over a year since he'd taken the first step toward rebuilding his financial life. Looking back, it was almost hard to recognize the person he had been, the man who felt trapped, overwhelmed, and unsure of his future. Today he felt something he hadn't in years: freedom. His phone buzzed with a message from Jasmine. "Big things coming your way," it read. He smiled, thinking of how much her encouragement had shaped his journey. Their conversations had sparked more than just financial clarity. They had taught him to think differently, to see challenges as opportunities and setbacks as lessons. Marcus opened his notebook, flipping through the pages filled with his scribbled goals, ideas, and reflections. Each entry told the story of progress, not just in numbers, but in growth, perspective, and confidence. He had built more than a portfolio, he had built a life. The past year had taught Marcus one undeniable truth: mastery wasn't a destination. It was a constant practice, a commitment to learning and evolving. He had come to see wealth as more than just money. It was the freedom to live on his own terms, the ability to support the people he cared about, and the confidence to face whatever came next. One of the biggest lessons had been embracing the power of consistency. Marcus remembered something he'd read in The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy: small, deliberate actions over time create exponential results. It wasn't about making grand, sweeping changes all at once, it was about showing up every day, even when it felt tedious or insignificant. His financial habits, automating savings, investing monthly, and sticking to his budget, had become second nature, each step reinforcing the last. But mastery, Marcus realized, wasn't just about maintaining what he had built. It was about sharing what he had learned. One evening, during dinner with Jasmine, he mentioned the idea of starting a blog to document his journey and share tips with others. To his surprise, she was enthusiastic. "People need stories like yours," she said. "It's not just about the money, it's about the transformation." So Marcus began writing. He shared how he had gone from paycheck to paycheck survival to financial freedom, offering practical advice alongside personal anecdotes. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers who saw themselves in his story, people who were tired of struggling and searching for hope. His blog wasn't just a platform, it was a reminder of how far he had come and how much farther he could go. Even as Marcus focused on growth, he stayed grounded in gratitude. He made it a habit to reflect on what he had gained, not just in material terms but in experiences and relationships. He had reconnected with family, deepened friendships, and even found moments to indulge his love for music. These weren't just byproducts of his journey, they were the reasons he had begun it in the first place. One evening, while reviewing his finances, Marcus paused to take stock of what truly mattered. His investments were growing steadily, his side hustles had become reliable income streams, and he had built a safety net that gave him peace of mind. But more than that, he felt whole. The man who had once been consumed by stress and self-doubt now faced each day with clarity and purpose. As the months passed, Marcus continued to build on his foundation, always looking for ways to refine his approach. He started mentoring younger colleagues at work, sharing insights on budgeting and investing. He even hosted a free workshop at the local library, teaching the basics of financial literacy. Each interaction reminded him of the power of knowledge and the responsibility to share it. On a quiet evening, as Marcus sat on his balcony watching the city lights flicker, he felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but he was no longer afraid. He had built more than wealth, he had built a life of intention, balance, and freedom. As he sipped his tea, Marcus thought about the path he had taken, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had walked with him along the way. Mastery wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. It wasn't about the finish line, it was about the willingness to keep going. And Marcus? He was just getting started. Take care and be well.